Hello, I'm George Lewis, and today I'd like to talk to you about my 2018 situational form work, P Multitudinous. The term situational form may be new to you, and indeed in the earliest versions of the score instructions, which you'll see here, I described P Multitudinous as an open form work. However, in my engagement with the creative process for this work, over the last 2 years, I've ended up navigating away from that characterization toward my current and ongoing development of the notion of situational form. In fact, my notion of situational form has back-propagated toward a reconsideration of earlier works of mine, such as Artificial Life 2007, as well as my interactive computer music works such as Rainbow Family from 1982 and Voyager from 1987 and after. Open form has been associated with ideas of freedom, particularly with respect to classical music's historically articulated dialectic with notation, and in that sense, I'd like to discuss two of the most radically open form works, Earl Brown's December 1952, and Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, also from 1952, coincidentally, the year of my birth. Both works deploy a form of silence with respect to materials, particularly instrumentation, leaving those open either to a performer-constructed environment, as in the Brown work, or an emergent one, as in the Cage work. Both works establish a relation with intentionality. The Brown work promotes intentionality with respect to a constructed and bounded conceptual event, an environment. A multidimensional relationship between eye, body, mind, ear, and time is foregrounded, but any relation to a larger network was not really a factor in the work. The paradoxical conditions of the Cage work manifest the intention to avoid intentional intervention in the sonic field. Neither pays any attention to its outside environment, an orientation that is enforced by both the score and the performance notes. In both the Cage and the Brown, the duration of the work is fixed before the performance. Cage used the title itself as a duration bound. More on this in a moment. Brown suggests that the performer should decide the duration of the work in advance. In practice, the use of a stopwatch is the most direct way to achieve this. In some versions of the Cage work, the performance may last for any amount of time. Well, the question arises here as to how an ending is to occur. Cage is silent on this. But the solution space for the question itself takes us to a different understanding of the relation between indeterminacy and improvisation, one in which indeterminacy is not a practice, and thus cannot be ideologically contrasted as oppositional to improvisation, as was taken to be the case for many years among theorists, composers, and performers. These short excerpts are from a performance of December 1952 at the February 2017 Music for Mirth concert at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis with Quinta, Joan LaBarbera, Zena Parkins, Christian Wolff, and me. The question arose before the performance as to how to end the piece, and I suggested that we simply search for and discover an ending through improvisation. Negotiation of desires and goals through improvisative parsing of sonic intention is something that most people generally know how to do in both artistic and non-artistic situations. However, the more experienced among us, Joan LaBarbera, Christian Wolff, strongly suggested the use of the stopwatch. Unlike an improvised ending, the use of the stopwatch eliminated the need to read the environment we were creating for clues as to how the piece would end, and encouraged a performance in which attention to the sonic environment was really unnecessary or even counterproductive to the realization of the work. What I found fascinating about this was that we discovered a signal difference between improvisation and indeterminacy in music without recourse to the usual overgeneralized and sometimes racially tendentious moral imperatives connected with the two practices. Hearing this experience in the context of my by now 40 years of work on interactive improvising music systems led me to borrow a conceit of David Harvey's in conceiving of a fundamental condition of improvisation that could provide an intelligible, non-hierarchical context in which the relation between improvisation and indeterminacy could be understood. In truth, I set a very low bar for ascertaining the presence of improvisation. In my 5-part conception of the condition of improvisation, we have first indeterminacy. The world is subject to a fundamental and continuous condition of indeterminacy where we cannot fully know what will happen next. And then there's agency. In some formulations, agency is defined as the capacity to act, but my definition of agency in improvisation is expressed in Latourian terms as the ability to make a difference. As agents, we make a difference in 3 ways. Through analysis, we analyze our environment and parse its features. In music, this is called listening, which is why listening is an improvisative process. And then there's judgments. We make judgments concerning this environment and our role in it, including predictions and speculations. And finally, there's choice. I have likened choice, metaphorically, to the collapse of the wave function. Individual and collective choice-making is an activity wholly outside of the provably rational. Before or after we make a choice, we can imagine it as proceeding from some criteria or other. However, we cannot be certain of either causality or correlation. I'd like to suggest that the above elements, indeterminacy, agency, analysis, judgment, and choice, will be found in any improvised act whatsoever, artistic or not, by machines, humans, and animals. This frees the concept of improvisation from musical and artistic models, allowing invocation of both the personal and the social on a broader basis. And I'd like to further suggest that these characteristics are sufficiently primordial that in a given proceeding, the absence of, or lack of influence of any one of them means that the activity in question is not improvised. Finally, I'd like to suggest the condition of improvisation is permanent, quotidian, and as ubiquitous as contemporary critical method allows us to assert. This brings us close to the conclusion of our introductory discussion of open form. Now that we can understand indeterminacy not as oppositional to improvisation, as in a post-Cage conception, but as an aspect of everyday life that is addressed through improvisation, reading the 2017 Brown performance in terms of those 5 criteria, we can see that we are in a condition of indeterminacy, and certainly choices are being made. However, we've already seen the lack of necessity for analysis and judgment. Not only that, but we cannot even be sure of our possession of agency. Although we have the capacity to act, it is unclear that we can really make a difference, or even what making a difference might mean. On this basis, neither the Brown nor the Cage are sites for improvisation. In contrast, Alvin Lucier's Vespers from 1968 is indeed a site for improvisation in my terms, despite the composer's demurrals. The sound of the work, which asks performers to, quote, accept and perform the task of echolocation, unquote, using a clicking instrument, is emergent from the individual improvisations of the performers, who are not asked to relate to each other in any way. However, all 5 elements of the condition of improvisation, indeterminacy, agency, analysis, judgment, and choice, are all part of the specification for the work in the text score. In that sense, improvisation is simply unavoidable in Vespers. And here I'd like to introduce curator Nicolas Bourriaud's notion of relational art. For Bourriaud, a relational artwork may operate like a relational device, containing a certain degree of randomness, or a machine provoking and managing individual and group encounters. Relational works, on Bourriaud's view, propose moments of sociability, presenting objects producing sociability. None of the 3 works discussed so far qualify as relational in this sense, and none exhibit an explicit sense of the production of sociality that Georgina Bourne identifies as an important function of music. However, since the Lussier work asks performers to respond to the environment and construct movement pathways on that basis, one could say that this is an early eruption of what I am calling situational form, or form that emerges from the interaction of performers along at least two axes, first in relation to a score, and second in relation to an environment. I want to use P Multitudinous, to which I will now turn, to further explicate the possibilities of the situational form work. P Multitudinous is designed for large forces, between 20 and 50 or more players. The work is partially open in terms of scale and instrumentation, and there is no centralized score. It was premiered in summer 2018 at the Banff Centre in Canada by the International Contemporary Ensemble and Ensemble Evolution. The full implementation of P Multitudinous includes 7 ensembles. First, there are 3 stationary ensembles, woodwind quintet, string quartet, and a contacta trio consisting of piano, percussion, and sampler, 2-channel electronics with sound samples provided. And there are 3 mobile ensembles who may move anywhere around or outside the performance space, a mobile trio of flute, soprano, voice, and trumpet, 1 or more mobile percussionists who can play with anyone, and 1 or more mobile conductors who move around the ensemble, gathering performers at will to execute sections of the score, creating ensembles, or even whole orchestral tuttes. And finally, there's the multitude, an open instrumentation ensemble for any number of players. The full complement of the work uses 2 types of notation. We see here text-based tasks laid out on a numbered grid of 16. All ensembles have a version of this task notation, which often asks performers to situationally execute tasks in relation to something happening now or something that recently happened. When working with this grid, any grid task may be chosen in any order that is logical. And then we have conventional, quote, precisely specified, unquote, Western notation, with 9 sections numbered 1 to 9. The stationary ensembles and the mobile trio have this kind of material in addition to the grid material. Sections with the same number offer a loose gestural relationship across the ensembles, even though tempi and dynamics, which are both mostly situational, vary between the ensembles. The written material to be performed is shown, except that dynamics are often situational, according to what else is going on, and a V symbol, which you see here, asks performers to create variations on the written material, tailoring the material in response to the current situation. The text for the work, the written material, includes settings of 2 texts taken from Baruch Spinoza's Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, written in 1675, published posthumously in 1677, and later banned. I'm going to just read the English. The right of a commonwealth is determined by the power of a people that is guided as though by a single mind. But this union of minds could in no way be conceived unless the chief aim of the commonwealth is identical with that which sound reason teaches us is for the good of all men. Well, the goal of a performance of P Multitudinous is to render audible the sentiments of this text. In comparison to Vespers, P Multitudinous's implementation of situational form adds a 3rd axis of interaction, that between the performers. This implementation also differs from the Lussier in exploiting what Born calls the immediate microsocialities of musical performance and practice, the social relations embedded in musical ensembles and associations, and the musical division of labor. And following another Born insight about music, P Multitudinous is designed to animate imagined communities among the performers, autopoietically aggregating them into what she calls virtual collectivities or publics. Here is the set of rules to live by in P Multitudinous. First, the rule of 3. The performers are tasked with the collective management of complexity, rather than a top-down approach used in other modes of composition. Thus, all performers must maintain awareness of which ensembles are performing and should not bring in new material if more than 3 ensembles are already playing. Situational form. As a rule, the introduction of new material should be chosen to be compatible with and at the same volume level as what is happening currently. We don't really need production of contrast. There'll be plenty of contrast anyway. Written or improvised music is always performed using trajectories, dynamics, transposition level, tempo, and more. Trajectories start situationally from the dynamic level in play at the time the new material is introduced and provide the subliminal sonic biorhythms of the work. Take your time. Performers are asked to take all the time they need to think and plan, individually and collectively. No instruction ever requires immediate execution. In P Multitudinous, silent planning is also improvisation, and silent contemplation regulates texture and silences. And then there's the detection of near entropy. Entropy is the process in which a given section of the music runs its course to completion. An important task of ensembles and performers is to detect the onset of entropy and to bring in new material before the current musical process terminates. As for the ending, in a situational form work, players listen to the environment, including their fellow performers, for cues as to when the performance ends. The ending is a collective achievement rather than a decision taken by a conductor. In my experience, this can be achieved without hand gestures or eye contact. So this is the last 3 minutes of the premiere in Banff, including the collectively achieved ending. P Multitudinous is open to performers from any musical tradition, including those that do not regularly include improvisation. Extensive prior experience with improvisation, while welcome, does not necessarily confer an advantage. The best results will be achieved by reading and following the instructions provided on the score with care. The score serves as a kind of toolbox for producing a range of sounds and forms that will far exceed what the composer would imagine. For that reason, there is no canonically correct way for P Multitudinous to sound. Rather than assuming that recorded or live versions of the work might constitute a model for how the work should sound, performers should assume the freedom to create what they want to hear from a combination of the tools provided and their own creative and cultural standpoints. You may have heard somewhere, or even firmly believe, that the lifeblood of improvisation lies in not thinking or in acting spontaneously. If so, this piece and its procedures will offer a strong challenge to those beliefs. The pianist and composer Cecil Taylor called improvisation feeling tempered by knowledge and judgment. Or, as the philosopher Gilbert Ryle put it in 1976, if the normal human is not at once improvising and improvising warily, he is not engaging his somewhat trained issue in some momentarily live issue, but perhaps acting from sheer unthinking habit. As with my other work in this Situational Forum series, the performance is achieved through negotiation and consensus, and its success will be less a question of individual freedom than of the assumption of personal responsibility for the sonic environment. Thanks very much for watching and listening.